Welcome to this video. In this video I would like to present you the 12 worst ABAP mistakes and ways to avoid them. Often you don't even know that you have made an ABAP error. You think you are programming correctly. Therefore, in this video I would like to show you the most common ABAP mistakes and, more importantly, how to avoid making them in the future. Enjoy this video and let's get started. So here we are right now in the ABAP editor in the transaction code SE38, and here I have implemented a simple ABAP report. I go into change, and here basically we can see that I have not formatted my ABAP code, and this is one of the most important mistakes you can make, not to format your ABAP code, because here we are seeing that we have a discrepancy in lower and upper letters, so parameters. The S is in upper case. Here we have data. There we have defined different variables in one line. There we have basically multiple statements in one line. There we have no intent, no format. It is really hard to read this code. And what I really recommend is to use the Pretty Printer to resolve this issue really easily, because also with the key combination Shift and F1 you can resolve this issue. Under Utilities and Settings, and then under ABAP Editor and then Pretty Printer, you can define your user specific settings for the Pretty Printer. So if you click on the Pretty Printer, how your ABAP code should be formatted. And I can recommend to check the setting intent, and then furthermore to check convert uppercase, lowercase. And for me, I would like to put all the keywords in uppercase. So I select uppercase. I can recommend using this one, and then you just click on the transfer button, or you hit the enter key on your keyboard, and then your settings are made. And as mentioned, with Shift and F1 or this button, there you can easily format your code in the first time, and then you just have to make sure to put, or just like this, to format your code really nicely. So you put defining a variable on one line, so every statement should be on one line. Let's do it like this, put some spaces, some line breaks in there, and yeah, basically we're good to go. Clicking once again on the Pretty Printer, and now we're seeing that all the type has been, or all the type definitions have been intended. And now, compared to the previous version, I think it's better to read and get a easier and faster impression what your code is doing. And the next common mistake is not to use comments. And in this case, I have implemented once again an ABAP report in the ABAP editor. And here we have basically the same report as we saw earlier, but here we also don't have comments. And you have two possibilities to implement comments. So first of all, with the quotes, and then you can do some comments, or with the star with the asterisk, and then, so for example, once again a comment. And what is the difference between those two? With the quote, you can put them at any position in the line. So for example, if I'm moving them to the right, it could be here. With the asterisk or with the star, you're not allowed. They always have to be at the first position. So if I would like to move them, as you might see, moving the color, this is not allowed. So this has to be at the first place. But here you don't have to describe your code, what you do, and so that you later on and other developers directly see what your code is about and can easily find maybe a mistake, or can adjust and enhance your code. And for example, if you're using always the same code blocks or comment blocks, you can use code templates, and you can create and maintain and use your code templates in the options. So here in the bottom right area, there you can click, and then you can open up the code templates. And over here we have defined, for example, a block code template. And then here you can define parameters. So starting with percent and ending with percent. And then, for example, if you would use them, then you can enter your parameter, and your parameter or this parameter will be replaced by your input. For example, here you have this little frame, and though this code will be automatically put into the ABAP editor, and you can use them. For example, you can create a new one. So for example, just click on test, then put whatever you like. For example, ERP app. And over here you can do a quote, and then you can use please subscribe ERP app if you want to, and then you can just click on save, and then you just over here have to type in your name of your code template. So for example, ERP_app, then use tab, and then automatically code will be put into. And for example, if you would like to maintain them, just click on this, and for example over here, as mentioned, with this percent starting and ending, save, and then once again ERP up, then you can type in a parameter, and for example this one, and then just this input will be put into this code block. And this is really helpful. So for example over here I have I have maintained different types. So for example, also with some statements, or for example here with the header, what you like. And this is really helpful to directly use comments and to make your code more understandable also for other developers. And furthermore, you can really easily find your inputs in the comments in the code scanner. So you open up the transaction code_scanner, and then over here you can type in your package. So in my case, I have created some temporary packages or objects. Therefore, I am entering $TMP. Or if you want to, you can just type in set asterisk what you like to. You can search for your package with the for help. And therefore here, for example, I am typing in ERP app, and then I am going to the execute. And over here, you can, for example, go to the set hello world program. So I'm double clicking on this one, and here we can jump into, in this case it's no comment, but we're searching for ERP app. And if you have some comments, so here for example, please subscribe. Now once again we jumped into our no comment program. Furthermore, it is really important to do sufficient tests, because if you're not doing tests, then you can't guarantee that your program works the way that you expected. And it is really important before providing before transporting the program into the productive system, that you test your code properly. And the most important, the easiest tests are manual tests. So here we are once again in the set no comment program. This program checks basically if your input is a palindrome. So for example here you make your own some inputs and check if you expect your outcome the way that you programmed it. So this is really important before transporting it into the productive system. Besides that, you can also implement some unit tests. And in this case, I have implemented a really simple test class that basically just sums two inputs, so integers, and returns the sum of those two numbers. And for this class, I would like to create a unit test. And to do this, you can right click in the object navigator, so in the transaction code SE80, and then you can click on create, and then down here generate test class. And here a wizard will open up. You can click on continue, and here on global class continue once again, and here your test class. And because you don't have one, then you click on this create, and here you can type in your name. So in my case, I just want to use it with a and test, the same name as the class, just with a underscore test at the end. And now I have this created. Then once again on continue, then I would like to create a test method for this method of my class. that I would like to test. I click on continue and then once again on continue and then on complete. And now my test class has been created successfully. And down here under local class, I can also see my created test class. And now we would like to change this one. So the sum number 2 that I would like to test. And in this case, I just would like to make some changes. So I would like to implement also a setup method to create this class. And first of all, I'm doing method setup. So, and down here, I would like to create it. So I have created this one, and in here I'm making a variable to save the result. So in this case, it's just a integer, and then I call the sum number 2 of the class I would like to test. So in this case, fcut, just basically. So, and now I have successfully finished the implementation, and what I'm basically doing over here in the setup. So in the first method that is being called of this test class, I am creating an instance of my class that I would like to test to have it available in the sum underscore 2 numbers method. And down here, I would like to get the result of 2 inputs, 15 and 3. And that is what I would like to compare in the class cl underscore abap underscore unit underscore assert. If you hit the F1 key, then you get a nice description of the ABAP unit, and just you can read it on your own later on. But basically here I'm doing an assert equals, so I would like to compare the received result with my expected result, and now I would like to activate this. And if you click on your class that I would like to test and then on execute and then unit tests with coverage, then you will see that no failed assertions. And for example, if we're going one step back and we are making over here an 4, so now it should be 19, but I expect 18. And once again, I execute the unit test with coverage. Now we're seeing that our test is failing. And this is one easy way how you can test your classes before transporting them into the productive system. Another mistake is to use modifications. So modifications are overwriting existing ABAP code. So for example, here I have opened up a program that is being executed if you enter the transaction code Miro. And for example, if I click on the change, then in this case, I would overwrite the existing code. And over here we have an assistant open up, and this gives you a little hint that you should never, or that you should not do a modification. You can, for example, here insert, replace, delete some lines, but you should not replace any code. Instead of replacing code, you have different possibilities to use. So first of all, here we have once again our class ERP app, and with the right click, so for example, and create over here, you can create another class. So for example, 2, and with this button, you can create an inheritance. Okay, so for example, just entering mandatory fields, and here you can inherit or add an inheritance. So for example, this class should inherit from this class. This is a super class. Save it, local object, this is totally fine. And here you can redefine an existing method, and if you want to, you can call the super method, passing all the same parameters if you want to, but over here you can add your own code and extend the existing code quite easily. If this is not possible, because for some cases you can't just inherit a class because you also have to change the implementation, you can also implement enhancements. And to use enhancements, so for example, over here we're opening the function builder because here we have a standard function module. It's called call browser. And now we're opening it up in the display mode. And over here are the function module under edit, and then enhancement operations. There you can show implicit enhancement options. And in the standard, at the end of a function module, at the beginning of a function module, and at the end, you can add enhancements. And to do this, you have to click on this enhance button, or you can also use the key combination shift and F4. And then once done this, then some buttons will show, and here you can for example click on create, and for example you can distinguish between a declaration or a code, in my case just code, and here you can double click, and now you can do your user specific code or your extensions, whatever you like. And before executing the standard code, your code will be executed. And for example, if you want to, you can also add at the end an enhancement to extend the standard code. Performance is enormously important for the perception and handling of the ABAP program. After all, the program is mostly used by an SAP user, either directly or indirectly. If the SAP user has to wait unnecessarily long, she will naturally become impatient and lose acceptance for the program. And therefore, you should always be aware of your performance, and you should use some little tricks. And with these little or simple tricks, you can increase the performance significantly. You have a faster access to internal tables. You can access to data tables with just the data you need. So you read only the data you really need. You specify a complete key. So you're using where conditions, between, and like. And you just specify the complete key. You avoid repeated single and using single accesses, and you're using joins instead of nested selects. And over here we are in a report set performance, and over here we can see that I am, for example, accessing multiple times the table echo. This is really avoidable, but what is great in this case that I'm using internal tables instead of doing some operations directly in the select. Over here, what I mentioned is that we select and we read only the data we really need. So we add an where status. I specify the complete key. So I have a single access for the mode. So I just select two columns, able and enum. And over here, I'm doing a join instead of nested selects. And there's one really important transaction that I can recommend. It's the transaction SAT. If you enter this, then over here you have a button called tips and tricks, also executable with the key F6. And once you've clicked this, you have a lot of tips and tricks to measure the runtime. So for example, if we're going to SQL interface, so here you can compare a select and check statement with the select with a where condition. So you just click on measure runtime, also executable with the F8 key. And then in the background, the two programs are executed, and now we can see the runtime over here. So how long this program has taken and how long this has taken. And we can see that this is a lot faster and we should use these kind of program instead of this one. And over here you can see a lot of important transactions regarding performance or regarding programming maybe in general. And if you want to, you can make a screenshot and analyze those transactions. Those are really important. One common mistake is also not to use modularizations. In ABAP Object, ABAP source code is programmed primarily in the methods of classes. It makes it easier to reuse, extend, and maintain the source code. So therefore, try to encapsulate the program logic in methods, function modules, and includes as often as possible and whenever it makes sense. So also maybe in programs. Although this takes more time during implementation, of course, it makes for a more robust and agile program. Obsolete ABAP statements are no longer recommended by SAP and should no longer be used because they have security vulnerabilities or they are better alternatives. And so here, for example, I have commented this out for this case, but here we have basically an obsolete statement, so the move statement. And if I click on this and hit the F1 key, then over here we can see that this is an obsolete statement. And you should also, for example, down here, use the alternative. And for example, if you're doing a syntax check, the obsolete statements are not always detected. So keep in mind, sometimes use the F1 key. So obsolete statements are detected by an ABAP runtime check. So for example, with the ATC. But in here, keep in mind not to use obsolete statements. The SAP system is designed so that you can dynamically adapt your processes to your own needs via customizing. So one common mistake is to use a static ABAP code. So for example, for texts. And with the customizing, this approach should also be followed in programming because, in my opinion, a major ABAP error is static ABAP code, and the source codes can only be adapted directly in the programming and not in the customizing tables. So you should never use hard-coded constants or value. So as we see in here, texts are the best examples for this. So no matter, for example, for translations or the adaptations of text, a generic approach is more effective in productive operations. Furthermore, you should not add a static breakpoint. You can add a static breakpoint with the statement break minus point. And once the ABAP runtime reaches this statement, then a breakpoint will be called and the program will stop. That, for example, also for the end users. So you should never use static breakpoints in the productive system. Sometimes for development purposes, it's quite useful, but please make sure to delete them afterwards correctly. One additional error is to use too many global declarations. In this case, it's fine. So what you should do in this case, it just basically calls a function module, and in there you're just selecting the creator of a purchase order based on the table echo and returns them. But what you should not do is to save too many global parameters or variables, because it's fine, you can use them in all subroutines, subforms, but you should always keep in mind to put the needed data where they are just needed. A good programming style, in my opinion, is to use local data declarations and use global definitions only when it is unavoidable. Authorizations are playing a huge role in the whole SAP system because based on authorizations, it is guaranteed that the SAP user only sees, executes, or maybe changes data that he or she is allowed to do. And if you're not doing an authorization check, then this can lead to major issues in the SAP system. So keep in mind to add authorization checks where they are needed. So based on this example, here we are doing an authorization check for a transaction code, and explicitly for the transaction code MIRO. And if the authorization check is successful, then the MIRO transaction code will be executed. This is really important also from IT security perspectives. Furthermore, a common ABAP mistake is not to use code analyzers, not to analyze your code via ATC. And even the best ABAP developer makes errors, and those can only be analyzed with some code analysis. So for example, in the object navigator, here we have a program set test, and when you right click, and then you can check, and then for example, ABAP test cockpit ATC. And over here we can see the outcome. So for example, two checks with the priority 3. One is the highest, so basically some syntax errors, but here we can see that a text element is missing in a character string. And if you click on the object name, then you directly jump into the statement. And in this case, as is totally fine, as we've mentioned in the previous common mistake, not to use static ABAP code, because here we have one static string instead of a text element, so no translation is possible just for English. And you should always do an ATC check. And for example, if you once again right click and then check and then ABAP test cockpit ATC with over options, there you can select one code inspector check variant. And when you open up the transaction code ATC, and then under manage check variants, there you can, for example, analyze a check variant. You can also create if you want to. You can click on the display, and now you can see what this check is basically checking, what this variant is basically checking. So doing some performance check over here. So this is really helpful in your daily work. This quote here is applicable in all areas of life. So also in ABAP development. You can always develop and improve. ABAP programs are the heart of the SAP system. They are used by various SAP users. Through various improvements, there are also better development possibilities. So for example, the new ABAP syntax from release 7.40. If you do not keep up to date, for example, on various SAP blogs, SAP training courses, SAP Help Portal, or maybe on this YouTube channel, ERP App, please do not forget to subscribe. You run the risk that at some point your programming style will no longer be sufficient for your current needs. You should also keep up to date with changes in syntax and the SAP system. Often certain ABAP terms become obsolete and should no longer be used, or there are ways to program ABAP more efficiently and with better performance. So this is 12+1 tip I would like to give you, and in my opinion, this is the most important tip you have to follow and you should keep track on. So thank you very much for watching. I hope you have enjoyed this video. If you have any questions, put them in the comment sections. Now I would like to know what is your common ABAP mistake. Have you made any mistakes? I would really love to know this. And if you like this video, please hit the like button and do not forget to subscribe to this YouTube channel. There will be great upcoming videos. Thank you very much, and then see you in the next video.